And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. Greetings, Mr. Gunnarsson.
Hello there. How are you doing this fine week?
The week has been fabulous. This day in particular has been horrible. Uh, I've broken a tooth and I have failed to finish a contract. So there's that. But other than that, yeah, the week has been absolutely fabulous, and the weather in particular has been fabulous. And 21 degrees during the day, 10 degrees during the night. That's fabulous.
Yeah. I mean, the weather here has been fine, except one day on Wednesday it actually snowed, which it's not supposed to do because it's actually not cold, but whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, on Thursday we had here the weather like, London type, very nice in the morning and then heavy raining the rest of the day after the noon until very late in the evening, heavy raining because potato. But other than that, it's, in some days the weather feels like because fuck you, that's why.
Yeah.
All right, we have a quite crowded news section, so I guess we should stop wasting time on petty nonsense and get straight into it.
Okay, let's get straight into the petty nonsense then. From the Telegraph, Stephen Fry is just the latest victim in the authoritarian left's war on funny. Quick, sharpen the pitchforks, light the torches, raise up an army of the outraged. For someone has dared to crack a joke without first filtering it for offensiveness and ensuring it was 100% PC. Get him. Actually, two people risked the ire of the right-on by making off-color gags. Both of them did it at the BAFTA Awards on Sunday, upsetting this usually agreeable session of mutual lovey backpatting with some disagreeable humor. First up was host Stephen Fry. Halfway through the proceedings, Fry broke from his predictable brown-nosing script and had a pop at the woman who won the award for Best Costume Design. Jenny Beavan, in crumpled trousers, leather jacket, and a lifeless scarf, was exiting the stage, going in hand, when Fry quipped, "Only one of the great cinematic costume designers would come to an award ceremony dressed as a bag lady." It was literally the first time Fry has made me laugh. But others weren't laughing, especially the joke-phobic uptights of the perma-outraged Twitter sphere, who fumed about Fry being misogynistic, quote, hideously rude, blah blah blah. The fact that Fry knows Beavan well, the fact that misogyny means an ingrained hatred for women, which seems an extreme tag to fix to a man who simply made a joke about a female friend's clubber, none of that washes with the humorless hordes of the PC sections of Twitter, who kill every gag with Stalinist scrutiny. Not content with slamming Fry so hard they cast him to flounce off Twitter, quote, "The fun is over," he said. The buzz killers then rounded on rebel Vâlsan. Wilson, a deadpan comic actress from Down Under, also sinned against PC at the BAFTAs. In fact, she committed the most mortal of sins in the eyes of the New Thought police. She got a laugh at the expense of transgender people. As part of a pretty witty one-minute monologue, Wilson said she hoped to win a BAFTA one day, and to that end she's been practicing her, quote, transgender face. She then put on a sad-looking pout. Anyone who has seen the execrable film The Danish Girl, starring Eddie Redmayne as Lily Elbe, the first person to have male-to-female surgery, will know that Wilson was taking a swipe at worthy actors. Literally all Redmayne does in that movie is transgender face. It's all lips and pain and permanently water-filled eyes. It's dreadful. Wilson satirized it brilliantly. But as sure as night follows days, and the Change.org petition follows a TV appearance by Dapper Laughs, the titty-nuts of Twitter weren't laughing. They never are. Quote, some people weren't happy with Rebel Wilson's transgender joke at the BAFTAs, declared the Huffington Post. One tweeter demanded of Wilson, "Do you know that more than half of trans people will attempt suicide at least once in their life?" Which I think might be the most joy vacuum response to a joke ever. The mauling of Fry and Vâlsan might seem like a blow-up over nothing, and it will soon settle over. Fry will soon be back tweeting, sadly, and Vâlsan will continue to entice Hollywood with her antipodean self-mockery. But the experiences nonetheless speak to a new comedy-strangling culture. Barely a week passes without news of a comedian being shouted at, shamed, and even shut down for making unwise wisecracks. Intolerant petitioners got laddish comic Dapalaf thrown off ITV2. Last month, Ofcom founder Jimmy Carr, guilty of causing considerable offence after he made a joke about dwarves on The One Show. In 2013, there was fury when comic Bill Mills, during an item called Defend the Indefensible on Radio 5 Live's satire show Fighting Talk, said he could, quote, turn around Claire Balding, that is, cure the sports presenter of her lesbianism. After receiving 19 complaints, 19, the Beeb cut that bit of the show from iPlayer. You'll never hear it again. It's been shoved down the memory hole, or perhaps comedy hole, where un-PC gags are sent to burn for eternity. Some comedians now refuse to do gigs on campuses because students are even more insanely PC than everyone else. The superb Chris Rock says students are so eager not to offend anybody that they won't laugh at edgy stuff. Jerry Seinfeld says comics always warn him not to go near colleges. They're so PC. What fun-sucking times we live in. Humor becomes all but impossible in an era where noisy mobs of self-styled holders of correct opinions are myopically policing what we say. Enough! Humor is one area of life where normal moral rules should not apply. Jokes are designed precisely to turn accepted wisdoms on their heads, to allow us to think and say outrageous things. The realm of comedy allows us to be rude, raucous, to experiment, to deal with life's ridiculousness and wickedness by turning it into a joke. If the PC lobby colonizes comedy as well as campuses and social media, then there will be nowhere left for us to let rip. So let's plant the flag of free speech in the sphere of comedy and declare it a no-go zone for the world police. You have no dominion here, joy killers. We'll joke about anything we want.
Well, if the PC police colonizes social media and campuses and whatnot, there will still be a place. There will still be this show. On a more serious note, yeah, I can't really say anything bad about this article. It's very well written. I will go even further. I mean, what's this? Oh my God, he made a joke about trannies. Oh, can you fucking imagine how bad that is? I don't want to. I may start publishing actually the jokes that I make in the private groups where we plan meetings, raids over ideologues pages and whatnot. The tranny joke that he made is particularly benign. I know quite far more horrific and offensive jokes than that. And I'm that guy that reserves the right to joke about the Holodomor, to joke about the Holocaust, joke about gay people, joke about Hungarians, joke about anything. And if you're offended, well, fuck you. I don't know. Am I really that much of an asshole?
Yeah, you are, but then then no one would invite you to the BAFTA anyway. So yeah,
fair point.
I mean, these two jokes mentioned here, they're not like they're really, really benign, and it's like they were not mean-spirited or anything like that, and it's just completely outrageous to me that people are outraged about this sort of stuff. I mean, the thing about humor is that that you're always trying to laugh at someone or at something. You're always trying to make someone look bad. That's the way humor works. I mean, just to demand that humor should never offend anyone just means that you can't have humor.
Yeah. Well,
And
you see, they don't say they shouldn't offend anyone. It just shouldn't offend anyone except white straight Christian men. Now
yeah,
it's
yeah,
okay to make.
exactly. It's just that this means that all humor has to target these couple of groups that are not protected by any of these these victim group status, and that just makes comedy very stale because we already have lots of jokes about white men and Christians and so on. Um, and and I mean, it's no one is complaining about these kind of jokes, or more or less no one. We all perfectly happy that people are making or allowed to make these kinds of jokes, but we should also be allowed to make jokes about other people. And this kind of taboo is just really stifling, and it makes comedy very one-sided and predictable.
Yeah, uh, it's also, and the British followers will again be offended because I say this, but I don't care. This idea that, oh, Ofcom found Jimmy Carr guilty of causing considerable offense, and as such, he probably was fined or reprimanded or whatnot. Why do institutions such as Ofcom even exist? Or if they exist, why are they allowed to make such decisions? It's ridiculous. I mean, if you don't like a particular program or the jokes that that particular program is promoting, then don't watch it. Is it really that hard? You can censor it by using your remote control or your mouse if you're watching it from a computer.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It really is sad. It really is a sad state of affair because many things, and especially in the uh, last 300 years, I would say, in Western culture, many things have progressed in terms of political thought, starting with comedy, starting with these kinds of more liberal arts, the theater and whatnot, satirizing these kinds of things or making jokes about uh, societal ills, whatever those are, whether they're a matter of opinion or a matter of fact. These kinds of things eventually create a more progression into the political thought of the general of that particular society. But not being allowed to do that, well, it closes a very important valve where we tear down our frustrations, where we vent our frustrations.
Yeah, maybe that's kind of the point.
Yeah, but repressing the populace's frustrations usually ends up in a revolt. It doesn't end up in the population being more obedient, or at least not being genuinely obedient. Yeah, sure, they'll listen to you what today, tomorrow, maybe a few years, but several years down the line, or maybe several decades, you'll get yourself a revolt. That's what happened here with the commies keeping on restricting everything, and they were like, well, it's working, so let's restrict some more. And then one day, well, shit hit the fan, and we all know what happened.
Yeah,
Uh,
but shit hit the fan when they dropped these restrictions. Uh,
not here, actually. After the Berlin Wall, things had gotten even worse here.
okay, okay.
Until December 25th, when, well, you know what happened on December 25th. But yeah, I mean, because Ceausescu didn't like Gorbachev and said, well, Gorbachev is insane. Now we should restrict more, not less. And well, that didn't work out so well. And several other, China, for instance, has had multiple revolts whenever it tried to restrict more after 1979. So what every time you try these kinds of things, they eventually end up in revolts. Sometimes they're bigger revolts, sometimes they're smaller revolts, but it never ends with complete, um, how should I put it, obedience. But maybe the point is, you cannot fool all the people all the time, but you can fool most of the people most of the time if you try hard enough, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, when you see these kinds of revolutions and revolts, they usually occur, or more frequently occur, after there's been repression in the past, and then things are letting up, and then you get the revolution. So when the oppression is at the worst, you usually don't get these kinds of revolutions. But there seems to be this sort of this sort of valley between total repression and freedom, where you get these revolts. But if you have a totally oppressive regime that just represses things brutally, then you usually don't get revolts. At least that's sort of my reading of history. I mean, there's exceptions, of course, but usually that is the case. Um, like in the Soviet Union, you had you had a couple of revolts, of course, but these were always repressed quite quickly and quite efficiently. And then only once you get Gorbachev, who's trying to, have this sort of socialism with a human face and so on, then you get these widespread revolts, and they're not brutally repressed, and then the system topples. Or take the French Revolution, for example. For 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 basically all the time before that, for centuries, you had this very very repressive society, very rigidly divided into these three estates with lots of privileges for the nobility and for clerics, and then you get um, you get the Estates General, because the king needs money and is willing to give commoners some extra rights in exchange for that, and then you get the French Revolution. All the centuries before that, you do not get these kinds of revolutions. So it seems to me that if you're actually willing to use repression ruthlessly, then it is a system that can work for a long time.
Yeah, but then again, by the same token, the American Revolution occurred when, at least they would say, the repression was at its height. They dared to increase the tax and put a tax on tea, and that was just too much. So
yeah, but once again, it's not a system where there's brutal repression. It's just a system where they've had lots of freedom for a long time, and then they get some restrictions put on them, and some tax and so on, and then they revolt. They don't revolt because they're brutally repressed. It's because they're being repressed a little bit.
I see. So in this context, okay, it's a fair point. It definitely admits some exceptions, but okay. But in this case, Britain hasn't been that restricted until relatively recently. I mean, in '95, you could still make jokes about pretty much anything, uh, but now suddenly you can't. So by your model, this should cause a revolt, maybe.
Yeah, that is quite possible. And I mean, we are seeing, I mean, not exactly a revolt, because I mean it's not exactly that earth-shattering, but we are seeing a lot of resistance to this kind of PC culture, where uh, where there's this very limited range of opinion you're allowed to express. There is a lot of backlash against that, and so we are seeing that, of course, on a much smaller scale than an actual revolution.
Yeah. Uh, Story goes that a Hungarian saw a whale in the middle of the desert and wants to go and drink some water because it's extremely hot outside. And some guy sees him and say, "Hey mate, don't go there. The water is poisoned in that well." And the Hungarian keeps on walking towards the well, and he goes, "No, please don't go and drink from there. The water is poisoned in that well." And then the Hungarian turns around and says, "Nem tudok angol," that is, "I don't speak English." To which this guy says, "Okay, then drink peacefully. It's very good." I would probably be fined by Ofcom in Britain if I would make that joke. Yeah, let's go to the next one, also from Britain, and also about the revolution eating its own. Coming from the Telegraph, Peter Tatchell hits back at claims that he's a bigot. Peter Tatchell, the veteran gay rights campaigner, has accused a university student of smearing him with false allegations of racism and transphobia, which he said were symptomatic of a witch hunt. The well-known activism was due to take part in a debate on tonight with Fran Cowling, a National Union of Students representative for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues, but she pulled out after claiming that he was a bigot. Miss Cowling, a PhD student at Nottingham University, said she would only take part if Mr. Tatchell withdrew from the event, accusing him of having used racist language and signing an open letter supporting the incitement of violence against transgender people. The controversial claims have provoked a huge response from supporters of the campaigner who has spent decades fighting homophobia and discrimination. Fran Cowling, apparently acting in the name of the National Union of Students, has denounced me as a racist and a transphobic. She has the right to refuse to speak alongside me, but not to make witch-hunting McCarthy-style untrue allegations. I have never used racist language or harassed anyone. I have challenged Fran Cowling and the NUS LGBT to produce evidence for these claims. They have failed to produce the evidence because the accusations are untrue. I have supported every anti-racist and pro-trans campaign for the last 49 years. I'm prepared to share a platform with people I profoundly disagree with in order to challenge and expose them. Free speech is one of the most precious of all human rights, said the campaigner. Mr. Tatchell, who was arrested some 300 times during a career in fighting for gay rights, is due to lead a discussion called Re-Radicalizing Queers, Should We Toe the Line or Cause a Stir, at Canterbury Christchurch University this evening. Ms. Cowling has not made any comments on the row. Isn't it lovely? I mean, I uploaded yesterday a video about this.
Oh my God. Only a bigot would claim he's not a bigot. I mean, isn't it obvious?
Yeah, the purported letter inciting violence against transgender people that he signed was a letter essentially written in support of what's that feminist name? Germaine Greer. And, you know, there is this divide on the trans exclusionary radical feminists and then liberal feminists. And, you know, Germaine Greer is of the opinion that transgenderism is a disease and whatnot. And you know, Peter Tatchell wrote a letter, actually co-signed the letter. He didn't write it. He's saying that, wait a minute, regardless of your opinion of Germaine Greer's views, she should be allowed to talk. If you disagree, well, you can ask challenging questions during the Q&A and whatnot, but banning her is wrong. Apparently, that's incitement of violence, isn't it?
Yeah, clearly. Because speech is violence.
Of course, absolutely. It can hurt the feelings. I mean, don't you know that X% are attempting suicide? So that definitely has to be because words.
Yeah, and I mean, if you scream really loudly directly into someone's ear, it can do physical damage. So
yeah, there's that. Especially if you use bullhorns. Oh wait, I wonder which group tends to use that. Yeah. On the other hand, the National Union of Students, whatever. Yeah, there are a bunch of slice buckets and whatnot, but they're a private business at the end of the day, and considering how many people Peter Tatchell has called in the past racists and homophobes, even though most of them were not, I have to admit that I have a very hard time garnering any sympathy for this guy. I mean, I have more sympathy for Germaine Greer than from this guy. At least Germaine Greer is an honest bigot. but this guy still pretends to be this fluffy humanitarian asshat. Oh my God, the free speech is the most precious human right. Yeah, except when the UK Independence Party wants to march at gay pride and you lobby to have them banned, or when you lobby to have a legitimate petition signed by hundreds of thousands of British citizens and you lobby to have them sidelined and not be discussed in the parliament. So, freedom of speech is a precious human right, except when it's people who disagree with you. So, no, I'm sorry. I just can't have any sympathy for this dude. I'm glad that the revolution is eating him. Am I being too harsh?
yeah, I'm not familiar with this person, this Peter Tatchell. So I can't really make any comments on that. But if he is as you described, then I'm not particularly sad about what is happening to him. Though, of course, it's not that people who are calling him racist and so on, not justified, but
No, he probably isn't. And
yeah,
you know, if I have to say something nice about Peter Tatchell, then I will say that unlike the pussies in the LGBTist ideological movement, this guy actually was willing to take the flag for his beliefs. You know, he went to Moscow and organized the first gay pride, which ended in hospitalization for him. So you know, I mean, at least he went where there is real homophobia and was willing to face some flack for his beliefs, no matter how wrong or right one may think they are. So, you know, I'll take Peter Tatchell over most of these safe space activists because, you know, at least Peter Tatchell, as much as I disagree entirely on every single point with him, you know, at least he's willing to argue his point to a certain extent.
yeah, that's. I mean, I don't know what all the things he was arrested for 300 times, but
Well, I don't know all of his arrests, but you know, he was arrested in Moscow several times for promoting indecent views or things of that nature. You know, the latest Putinist laws against what they call homosexualist propaganda. So you know, there's that.
yeah,
Uh,
that is definitely something one can admire.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if all of the 300 incidents involve these kinds of petty nonsense. And besides, given his age, you know, he was arrested in the past for making a gay pride event in the 70s when it was not so particularly socially acceptable to do so, and you know, the police would find reasons to arrest people because potato. So you know, there's that. I mean, he's relatively old. And you know, at that age, if you're active in the social justice warrior movement since '69, you kind of tend to gather quite a lot of these kinds of transgressions
Yeah,
with the law. Well, so there's that. I don't know. We should follow this and see in the future how if Tatchell will lose his street credibility within the wider far left or not. Maybe he'll be rehabilitated, or maybe not. Maybe he will go down the memory hole like others went. Anyway, let's go to the next one. Insideman.co.uk. I think this one is supposed to be good news, essentially. What happened when a male student gave a talk on men's issues to his university's feminist society? At times, it seems as if the debate around gender or on university campuses has rarely been more volatile and polarized. On the other hand, there are frequent reports of intolerance on campus towards non-feminist views, with student men's societies being blocked by feminist campus campaigners, and last year's plans to mark International Men's Day at the University of York vetoed by a joint letter from students and professors. On the other, the National Union of Students and feminist campaigners claim sexist lad culture is rife on university campuses. So, in light of all of this, you might think it would be a brave man indeed who would offer to give a talk on men's issues to his university's feminist society. But that is exactly what third year Surrey University psychology student Mike Parker did to mark International Men's Day in November last year. Here he describes what happened. It may both surprise you and give you reason for hope that the gender war may not be as intractable as at times it may appear. Up until November last year, all my discussions around the contemporary issues facing men had been online, a very small corner of a particular website where, for the most part, I would expect most people to agree with me. Not exactly the most productive pastime, I know. So when my university's feminist society, of which I am an occasional member, invited me to give a talk on men's issues, I leaped at the opportunity. I asked my subscribers on YouTube and great organizations like the Mankind Initiative, Survivors UK, and Inside Man what I should cover before devoting time probably better spent on my degree researching and structuring a talk. So, with the muffled sound of a jazz band playing below us, giving an inappropriately chirpy air to a talk about domestic violence, sexual assault, suicide, and depression, I presented my case to a surprisingly full room of feminists as to why they should care about men's issues. I titled my talk Silent Sufferers because, as far as I can tell, in both politics and general life, men and their issues are systematically ignored. There is quite simply a culture of silence when it comes to men's issues. Perhaps after that night, though, there will be a few more voices speaking out for them. To be sure, I did not pull any punches. I opened by talking about domestic violence and laid out the rather damning critique of the feminist theory in domestic violence research that researchers like Professor Murray Strauss have presented. I explained the suppression of data and the harassment of researchers whose findings acknowledge female perpetrators and male victims by people calling themselves feminists and in the name of feminism. And to the credit of the society, they simply took this on board. No hackles, no complaints, no how dare yous, just an acceptance of this happened. Later, during the discussion, I asked if anyone had any disagreements. When they said no, I was surprised. No one found any of this controversial, I asked. Well, it was all controversial, someone replied, but you presented us with good evidence, so we can't really disagree with you. I couldn't have asked for a better result, to be honest. To have people admit to simply being convinced by sheer weight of evidence is rare in any situation, and many of my online comrades in men's issues think it is impossible when it comes to feminists. In fairness, the odds were perhaps stacked in my favor. I am a regular member of the society, and my particular studenty pro-feminist and leftist brand of men's liberation might be a bit more palatable to them than the political opinions of many online men's issues advocates. But then I would argue that for anyone to have any effect, they need to integrate into other groups and make bridges, so perhaps the ease of convincing them was just a sign of this particular approach working. In reality, I realize that this will change little. As well-intentioned as the people in the room were, and no matter how convinced they were that action was needed, none of them are in any position of power. They do have a few projects which, either on the initiative of someone else or by my insistence, have been broadened to include men's issues. It is a start, but it's unlikely to change the culture of silence overnight. But though they cannot change anything directly, they can start to change the narrative. Perhaps the next time someone talks about rape or domestic violence only as a women's issue, or say that men need no help at all, one of them will perk up with a, well, actually, and be able to use the evidence I gave them for a good cause. Perhaps, even if it's only at one small pocket of a one small, distinctly South England university, the culture of silence has been broken.
So, I mean, I think this is definitely good news, but that last paragraph is, of course, accurate that this will likely change little.
True. On the other hand, we're always willing to admit that, for better or worse, many of these students are the future uh, occupiers of the corridors of power. God help us. so, so there's that. I mean, yeah, it's gonna change little now, but if we are to follow that story consistently, the impact in the future may be significant.
Yeah, definitely there's a chance of that. Of course, it remains to be seen what these people will actually do about it. It's one thing to nod along and say, yeah, this is an important issue, and then people can still go on ignoring that. That's
Mm-hmm.
where that's going
Mm-hmm.
to happen is we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and call me a cynical asshole if you want, but that's what I think it will happen. I hope I will be proven wrong, but as far as I'm concerned, and as far as experience has shown to me, and again, I could be wrong, I hope I will be proven wrong. This and even this guy admits it. His brand of studenty leftist men's liberation thing. Yeah, I don't think this brand works. I think it's garbage entirely. I hope I will be proven wrong, but I don't think I will. Every time you approach things from this perspective, you get quite a lot of, feminists, liberals, whatever, to nod along, to get along, which is in their nature to do anyway. But then little to nothing changes when it comes to them afterwards, implementing what they supposedly learned in their future political advocacy efforts. That's
Yeah,
usually the case.
it's essentially what Ron Farrell has discovered.
I don't know. I haven't read most of Warren Farrell's work, so yeah, I trust your word on that.
Because
But
that was basically his approach, and he was a feminist, and he
yes,
also wanted to integrate this kind of perspective that men also face vulnerability and are many problems of men are ignored and so on. And the feminists generally nodded along, and that and they let him have his men's groups and so on. But in terms of actual policy, he didn't change anything
Mm-hmm.
as long as he was as long
Especially,
as he had this sort of nice, friendly, conciliatory approach. People sort of patted him on the back, and but nothing more happened.
yep, and that's why I have a lot more faith in the fuck their shit up approach, rather than this, enlightened academic approach, which has its role, but as long as you don't make individuals remember an experience at an emotional level, it's very likely to even remember it. I don't know, let's say 6 months from now. I mean, that would be an appropriate study. Go and look for the people that were in this guy's at this guy's talk, and ask them again 6 or 8 months from now. In December 2016 or November 2016. Go and ask them, do you remember that talk? Or tell me three things that were said at that talk. Three names of researchers or something, some keywords. Want to bet that a tiny percentage of them will even remember the talk happened because they attend multiple of conferences like this throughout their student lives.
Yeah, probably.
So there you go. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Okay, next one is really brief. It's a much longer article. I just picked out one paragraph from this. This is from heise.de, and it's about the Cologne events, and specifically about the forgotten male victims. Upon request, the prosecutor's office of Cologne revealed that a, quote, preliminary rough evaluation of the criminal charges pursued revealed that among the aggrieved parties, the ratio of male to female persons was 1:5 as of the 20th of January. 1/6. That is not an irrelevant group. As of the 29th of January, the authorities have recorded a total of 1,016 criminal charges. In other words, about 170 men were affected. The prosecutor's office gives little detail as to what exactly happened to these men. All they could do was to report some general impressions. To wit, men became victims of theft, but there weren't any major physical attacks. However, men had been separated from the women they were with. The investigators declined to give more detailed information at this time. Since you're probably tired and sick and tired of this Cologne stuff, just really briefly, just throwing some numbers out there that yes, it was not just women who were affected by this. There were also, apparently about 170 men. It's still mostly women, but this 1/6 of male victims should not be ignored, and sad it has been for the most part.
Yeah, it kind of disappeared. The initial reports mentioned something like that, and then they suddenly disappeared from the rest of the further investigative reports that the mainstream media has printed. Uh, that's a bit sad. It's pretty much the same thing. It pretty much adds to the argument that I kept on making. Most of the victims in those particular events were not victims of sexual crimes, but so a significant portion of them were victims of theft or other, or being slapped or things of that nature. And not all victims were women either. I kept on saying that multiple times, and I was called an asshole for saying it, but it's true.
Yep.
Okay, let's get the next one. As you said, this particular piece of news is getting too old.
Yeah, it's no longer news. Okay, this next one is from the Mittelbayerische Zeitung. The majority does not believe in the gender pay gap. Even though there are obvious differences in pay between men and women, the majority of employees believe that there is no gender pay gap at their workplace. This is the result of a new study by the career platform Glassdoor. The study analyzes the perception of the attitude to the perception of and the attitude to the pay gap between men and women. It is based on a survey conducted in Germany and six other Western countries: France, the UK, Canada, the Netherlands, the USA, and Switzerland. Here are the most important results from Germany. The majority of Germans does not believe in the gender pay gap. In spite of women earning 7% less than men, even with the same qualification and the same work, 7 out of 10 Germans believe there is no pay gap at their employer. Salary justice between men and women influences people's application behavior. 69% of female employees in Germany would not apply to a firm they suspect of having a gender pay gap. Among male employees, that number is 51%. An overwhelming majority of Germans is in favor of equal pay. 90% of Germans believe that men and women should be paid equally. On how to fight the gender pay, the pay disparity, across the country studied, people demanded more pay transparency. Almost 1 in 2 Germans demands the government intervene. And then it goes on with some more pious platitudes about justice and equal pay and so on.
Pious platitudes. Yeah, not surprised at all. I'm surprised the number isn't even higher than 7 in 10. I would have expected it to be slightly higher. And also I expected the numbers to be slightly lower in the cohort of people who would say that, well, I wouldn't seek employment to a company where I suspect there is a gender pay gap. I'm surprised that there's such a large amount of people who would say this. And now I don't know if they would actually do it. I mean, I don't think there's too many people out there who say, "Hey, look, I have this job for you. It's 3 million euros per year, the salary." Would you say no because you think that the secretary may make 2,000 euros a month less than the other secretary at the other department? I don't think so.
Yeah. Of course, when you have these kinds of studies, there's a lot about saying socially desirable things, saying, I don't care about fairness in pay and so on. That's not a very popular thing to say. So lots of people say that and say, I would not support an employer who is so evil. But whether they actually do that is an entire different question.
Yeah, well, I don't support equal pay. There you go. I'm evil.
Yep.
Well, there is no such thing as equal pay outside of left-wing fantasies. And actions speak louder than words. I mean, there have been multiple companies throughout the European Union who've been named and shamed by the European Commission for being, sexist and discriminatory and whatnot. And for what I've seen, most of them, were manufacturing companies, building machines and whatnot. They have expanded, haven't shrunk. I mean, it would appear that there is a significant chunk of people who don't give a toss about, politically correct name and shame. They just like the big salaries that they are there, and they'll take advantage of them if they can, and that's it.
Yeah. Also, these questions asked are a bit problematic because they talk about just the gender pay gap, whether it exists or not. The question is, what do they mean by that? Do they mean that on average, either by mean or median, women have lower salaries? Yeah, of course, that's true. There's lots of statistics on that, and no one disputes it. The question is whether it's caused by sex discrimination or by other factors.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you don't clarify exactly what you mean by gender pay gap, then these results are almost entirely worthless because you don't know what question the people actually thought they were answering.
True. That's absolutely correct. Because a person like me would answer to the implication upon whether it's sex discrimination or not, and then probably a student at the Faculty of European Studies would probably answer to the question whether it exists or not as a mean or median. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. The results of such a survey would be quite worthless if it's not
I
made
mean,
clear.
of course, I don't know how exactly the study was conducted. I just read this
Hmm.
this article. I didn't read the actual study, so I don't know if how clear they made this in the actual study.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
And of course, um, science journalism is not exactly very high level usually. I mean, they usually make lots of elementary mistakes, and
True.
so I have no idea whether it's that's a problem with the study or just with this article.
With the reporting. Yeah, you remember we read some similar things in the Telegraph, and it was impossible to understand what exactly the researchers even studied. We had to go during the live show. We had to go look for the original links to at least understand what the hell what the hell the reporting was about. So yeah, there's that. Okay, then I guess we can go to the next one.
Okay, next one is on a well, somewhat related issue, um, and it's im- uh, from the FAZ, die Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Um, Advanced women improve the bottom line. Should women clean, cook, and watch their children, or rather be in leadership positions in companies? Apart from the issue of justice, there's also a purely economic way of approaching this question. Women should be in leadership positions if that makes firms more successful. But is this the case? Yes, says a new study by the Peterson Institute for International Economics in Washington. Researchers have analyzed data of almost uh, 22,000 firms from 91 countries around the world and found a very striking correlation. A 30% higher proportion of women in leadership positions results in a 15% increase in net revenue. In this, it isn't very important that women make it all the way to the top. It is sufficient if enough women are on the board or in the level of leadership below the board. These results seem very impressive at first glance. There have been several similar results in the past, but the breadth of the data dwarfs any previous studies in this field. Back in 2007, McKinsey found a significant correlation between a higher proportion of women in leading positions and an increase in the return on equity and the EBIT margin. However, the consulting firm only studied the 100 companies with the greatest gender diversity in the whole world and compared them to the average of their industry. And there's two more paragraphs with two more examples of similar studies, which I'm going to skip. Um, However, all these studies, including the new from Washington, have a crucial flaw. They do not establish whether the firms are more successful because they have more female managers or whether more women get in leadership positions in firms that are already doing well. It is a classic chicken and egg problem. And the open questions continue. Even if it is women that lead to higher performance of firms that leaves open the question of why. Do women bring a different, more female point of view to their work? Or is it a particular type of very successful firm that maintains a very open culture which allows many career women to flourish? The new study doesn't answer any of these questions, just like its predecessors. But science does offer an answer to a different question. If firms with more women leaders are more successful, can this success be forced through a women's quota? The answer is an unequivocal no. The Washington study reveals that companies with a women's quota for their board do not perform better than others. All the studies show similar results. In 2011, Kenneth Ahan and Amy Dittmer showed that the women's quota in Norway had significant negative effects on the stock prices of the affected firms. Renee Adams and Daniel Ferreira found similar effects in the United States. These studies also speculate on the reasons for this. When younger and less experienced female employees are promoted to meet a quota, they usually don't do as well as the old hands. One result of the New Washington study seems to confirm that. The strongest positive effect of women on company performance were found in firms that practiced women's advancement on a broad basis and throughout the entire hierarchy. So I thought this was quite an interesting article, and one of these pieces of science journalism that is actually quite good.
Yeah, at least it provides, similar results, and the quotations make sense. So there's that. I don't know what to say. I mean, what does it mean promoting at the level of the whole hierarchy? Exactly the last paragraph. What does that even mean?
I guess basically that firms have some sort of focus on hiring more women and promoting more women throughout the whole organization, and not just this idea that we need to fill this quota like quick. Let's just select this couple of women, no matter whether they're actually ready for that, and promote them to the board or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's the point they're trying to make there.
I see. Yeah, I'm not convinced, but because I think we discussed this topic before. In leadership, there is a particular type of personality that fits, especially in very large firms like Volkswagen or IBM or things like that. It's a particular type of personality. Now, experience so far has shown that that particular type of personality tends to be found in men a little bit more, or perhaps significantly more, than in women. That doesn't mean there are not any women who do fit that type of personality. Just so far, experience has shown that a lot fewer women do meet those personality criteria that are tend to be drawn by these kinds of positions. Now, it could very well be that throughout the years, more women started adopting those kind of personality traits, rather than this idea that, but if they promote it at the whole level um, of the hierarchy, they're just going to have more women in there, and therefore they're going to get more revenue. The correlation is a bit thin. And a very good question by the author of the article. Does this mean that simply having such policies ends up generating more revenue, or it's just that women are more drawn to companies that do well? It's a very good question.
Yeah. Though for my part, I will say that it is definitely possible that that having some women in leadership positions does improve performance. So that's certainly possible. I don't know whether that's true or not. It's certainly a question worth studying. But if it does, then we do not need to force companies to promote more women. Then it will be in their own self-interest to do so. I don't know if it actually is the case, but I think if it is, then those firms will probably be in the best position to actually decide that, because they have the most relevant information. I also would expect that it depends on what kind of firm you're talking about, what kind of women are working for this firm, and so on. There's lots of details that go into determining that question, which is probably not going to be some sort of one-size-fits-all answer that the optimal ratio is of men and women on boards is this particular number, but maybe it just varies between different firms, and of course the much more important thing is how qualified are the other people, whether they're male or female, to do the kinds of jobs they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and there is this variation that can be seen, and I do agree that's the problem with social justice warriors, that they have subverted the language entirely. But there is some case to be made that culture does make a difference. For instance, in Thailand, there is no such thing as fishermen because 80% of the fishers are women. But and that pretty much applies to other countries in that particular area. But it doesn't apply in Europe, where 85 to 90% of fishermen are, well, men. So there is a point to be made into culture. So when it makes, they say that they made an analysis for what, 180 countries or something like 171 countries.
91 countries.
91 countries. Well, there you go. 91 countries. It means that they've taken some Asian countries as well, or probably South American. So it does depend. You can't make global average because, and even if you can make a global average, but it doesn't really tell you about various circumstances. In some cultures, some things go one way or the other in terms of having these variations by sex in some industries compared to others. And this is another aspect that I don't think government can ever solve or should solve, because as you said, there is no one-size-fits-it-all solution. That is, of course, implying that there is a problem, which I don't think it is.
Yeah, of course, that's always the problem with this kind of big aggregation. You look at these, 22,000 firms, and they're all very, very different, and trying to draw these kinds of conclusions from all these firms operating in very, very different conditions is a problem. Though, of course, if you just look at a small number of firms, then of course you have much less data, and results are a lot more vulnerable to just random chance. So it's not a problem that can be perfectly solved.
Yeah, that's why these kinds of macroeconomic analysis and attempts to plan the economy in some way, whether it's what sex the employees have or other forms of economic planning, that's why they always fail, because you cannot have all the information. You just can't. And I don't know how many times how many more failures have to occur before we start understanding this aspect. You just cannot have all the information. Because if you compare, I don't know, let's say there is I forgot the name of the company, but if you compare, there is a big corporation in Thailand that makes fish cans, fish related cans. If you compare that, and they have a very good revenue, they're probably listed on the stock. No, they're definitely listed on the stock market. And if you compare that with I don't know, let's say Volkswagen's division in Hungary. Yeah, sure, they're both big corporations, but the comparison, I don't think it's quite relevant in any way, whether it's on what kind of employees they have, or what kind of revenue, or how much revenue and whatnot. They're completely different. It's apples and oranges comparison.
Yeah, and of course, with these kinds of studies, another problem is that there's lots of degrees of freedom for researchers. There's lots of different things you can look at, lots of different metrics you can look at, and if there's one particular result you want to find, namely that having more women in leadership positions leads to good results, then there's lots of different ways you can slice and dice the data and look for ways in which it confirms your hypothesis, and you just sort of quietly drop all the other analysis that has inconclusive results or maybe leads to the opposite conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Also, of course, this problem that the media and academia is very much on one side of that particular question, or at least the vast majority of it is on that side, showing that more women leads to better success. So studies that show that particular result gets promoted a lot more than studies that show the opposite. And there are those, of course, also. I mean, two of them are mentioned here in this article. So that's always the, the,
No
the
way.
problem of trying to draw sort of general conclusions from just a couple of studies.
Yeah, it's the same thing in in other areas of science, such as climate science, for instance, where there is this sort of orthodoxy or predisposed, pre-established conclusion. And, as you said, there's various degrees of freedom among the researchers. But my main problem with these kinds of global studies is precisely this, that it doesn't take into account various other factors that may not have anything at all to do with the sex of the employees. It may have everything to do with factors that probably even don't exist. I mean, you can't really compare the corporate environment in Thailand with the corporate environment in Norway. They're entirely different by any metrics.
Yeah.
You know, even if you can make the case that the corporate environment in Thailand is subjected to a similar degree of control by the state, because Thailand also has a pretty much socialistic economy, especially when it comes to big corporations, just like Norway. But then again, there's different kind of control, and in different kind of environment, in different kind of culture, in different kind of markets. So they're not comparable. So when you have these global aggregate, I'm not convinced that it makes a case one way or the other.
I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't go quite so far. I mean, um, these kinds of correlations are definitely interesting, and there are some evidence. There's some evidence in favor of the proposition that promoting more women will lead to better success. It's just not the be all end all of results, even though it is a very impressive sample and so on. But I wouldn't just entirely dismiss this kind of study.
No, I'm not entirely dismissing it. I'm trying to apply skepticism to it and say, I mean, maybe there is in the actual study some consideration being given to cultural differences. Maybe it isn't, or market differences. I mean, again, different kinds of markets being available. It's not so. It's not. It's a different kind of market when you're a corporation in Hong Kong than when you are in Germany or in Norway or in Switzerland. So there's a lot of aspects that can drive revenue up and down that have nothing to do with how many employees are available. If you're an old man corporation in Vietnam, for instance, with a country with very small access to global markets because of the communist government in there, which is slightly trying to get towards a more capitalistic approach, but it's still way behind the curve. Versus if you are a mixed corporation in terms of sex in Switzerland. Yes, of course the Swiss one will going to have bigger revenue, but is it because they have more women, or is it because simply they're in different markets, they play in different leagues?
I mean, yes, but on the other hand, when we do this kind of research, of course, you always have to do it in a reductionist way. You're just looking at some particular factors and see um, what sort of correlations you can draw from them. Of course, no one is saying that how many women you have on the board or on the in other leadership levels is the only or the most important factor for your success, but it may very well be one factor. So that is, I think, something worth studying. And you have this very large data set, and you um, look at these thousands of firms, uh, then these kinds of random variations will play a much smaller role than if you have a small data set. So I don't think that this kind of methodology is somehow fatally flawed because you're looking at different kinds of countries.
Okay, I guess I'll have to see the raw data and have some play with it myself. I mean, you you and I both know that if you squeeze the data long enough, you can get any set of data to tell whatever story you wanted to say. So there's that. Sticking on the topic of the sex of the employees, going to the next one. From Norway, from NRK. 4 out of 10 male nursing students drop out, citing a feeling of being discriminated against. Nursing student Christian Imingen Kjellet has been told by a female nurse that men barely make the cut to take up the trash and be on the sluice. I think it is very sad that there are so many barriers. We need more men in this profession here, and there is a disproportionate number of women. And I noticed it especially in the working environment. It gets better when there is an equilibrium of both sexes. Christian Imingen Kjellet is in his last year as nursing student at Hedmark College and currently practices in internal medicine department of the hospital in Hamar. Although he likes being a nursing student and says it fulfills him a lot as a human being, he also wishes that there were more men sought out to study. And not least, that several of those who begin to study actually complete it. For in his cohort, 10 out of the 25 young men who started the course have abandoned it in the meantime. That would be 40%. This male dearth and desertion of the profession is not unique to this area, but identical to the national average, according to the figures provided by the Norwegian Statistics Bureau, the SSB. 4 out of 10 male nursing students do not complete their education. Only half of the male nursing students in Norway completed studies after the 3 years in the period of 2009-2014. 12% of students completed the program within 5 years in the same period, and the rest of the students, about 40%, dropped out of the studies. Approximately 9% of Norwegian nurses are men. This is a significantly lower percentage than in many other European countries. Italy is the country in Europe with the largest proportion of male nurses. In Italy, 25% of the nurses are men. Christian believes that the working conditions as the students go towards practice work may be an explanation. Many of the men feel simply squeezed out of this role. They feel a little out of place, and perhaps especially during practice, because it is some female nurses who are a little wary of men. He especially remembers an example of what he ironically calls the old good nurse. I had a female nurse in practice tell me that the boys barely make the cut only to take up the trash and be on the sluice. These kinds of experiences create a shock of practical work. Runar Bakken, senior lecturer at the Faculty of Health and Social Sciences Academy in southeast Norway, has for many years taken a closer look at gender issues surrounding the nursing profession. He has also published several books on the topic. Bakken says that the boys know they are in minority when they start the nursing program, but that the female dominance is much larger than anyone would expect. There is a greater or lesser shock to experience this in practice where the female dominance is. When I think of the teachers that are women, most supervisors are out in practice are women, and they are not used to train male applicants to begin with. The whole syllabus is steeped in that it is women who will conduct the course. Skipping a bit, he believes that many nurses have bigoted beliefs on how a nurse should be, which means that men can feel uncomfortable when they are out in practice. I think in many ways they are being judged by an inherited female standards on how to do and how to be a nurse. I think that's one of the reasons why so many drop out. They do not get a confirmation of a sort of masculine way of doing things. He adds that the only examples in the curriculum where men are even mentioned there are when it is problematic to be cared for by a man. You cannot find male models or male examples except when it is problematic when men will perform, for instance, intimate wash on women. I submitted a report to the authors of the standard work, and they were embarrassed when they were presented with this unequal presentation. Speaking a bit, Eli Gunhild City, chairman of the Norwegian Nurses Association, is also very concerned about the statistics and the big male dropout rate. The Health Directorate has determined that Norway will lack 30,000 nurses for 20 years. From this experience, the city believes that the consequences of the dropout rate are extra large. This certainly has consequences. We are facing major challenges in the health sector, both in city hospitals and in municipalities, and we need to work harder to recruit enough staff, so it is absolutely vital that we manage to reduce the dropout rate. Skipping some more, only 9% of Norwegian nurses are men, a gentleman's share which is lower than many comparable countries in Europe. The student branch of the Norwegian Nurses Association is working actively to get more men to choose the nursing profession. They put last year a project called "Men Can Become Nurses." But what are we actually doing to attract more male nurses in this country and to get current male nursing students to keep on studying and not drop out? Vâlsan has more input and views. The literature can be made so that the male nursing students can rediscover themselves as role models. In addition, one can increasingly offer male mentors for male students. For what we know, there indeed is a pattern that many quit because they do not get any sort of male attention. Also, health policy spokeswoman for the Conservative Party, authoritarian, believes one must make new initiatives to bring about a change in the gender balance. First and foremost, we must have a more modern attitude towards this with internship and employment. We need a bigger full-time culture. Then also the unions ought to be willing to sit down and discuss shifts, both life cycle-oriented internship and the opportunity to work more during certain periods. She also believes that there must be more focus on quality and results. Health services must become more quality controlled and results oriented so that we get the best talent and seek nursing education, whether it is women or men. And then it goes on for a little. Um, I won't be holding my breath on someone emerging to call this proof of matriarchal oppression. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm being consistent on this. I don't think it is a problem to begin with. Yeah, sure, men drop out from studying, from becoming nurses. Yeah, so what? Why should this be a problem? Just like I don't think it is a problem that women drop out from whatever because they feel lonely and they don't like the male gaze. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I don't particularly care uh, whether a particular industry has 10% men or 50% men or 90% men or even 100% or 0% men, as long as everyone is free to enter it uh, and as long as these ratios come about by people's free decisions, I don't really see where the problem is.
Yes, and I think one of the reasons, and I'm probably going to be very unpopular for saying this, but one of the reasons, and the conservative woman there has a point. Being a nurse in Norway comes with very little quality control. It's pretty much of a job that time goes on and the wages keep on coming into the bank account, and that's pretty much it. And that's not a very motivating career for your average 19, 20-year-old man. It's just not. How No matter how politically incorrect does it sounds, it's true. That's one aspect. The second aspect is that being a nurse, you're pretty much stranded or stuck into a bureaucratic, highly inefficient state system, because private hospitals are still de facto banned in Norway. Well, there are some exceptions, but the exceptions are just there to confirm the rule. Whereas in Italy, because they give the example of Italy, well, in Italy there's actually a very strong private sector healthcare sector. Sure, some of it is controlled by the Catholic Church, but it's private nonetheless. So when there is private incentives, there is also incentives to make the profession not to appeal men more, but to take some of the measures that are necessary, then that in the long run may attract a little bit more men into the profession to begin with. It's pretty much like with education. There's more men in private education than in state education. And why is that? I don't think it has a. I don't think if there is such thing as a pervasive culture of bitches who are professors in kindergartens or whatnot. Well, how come they suddenly become less bitchy when they get into the private kindergartens? So maybe it has something to do with the form of property of the system than it has to do with any sort of intentional or unintentional sex discrimination.
Maybe if your students are customers instead of nuisances, maybe you treat them a bit better.
There you go. There you go. Yes.
Yeah, but it's just if you have this sort of state system, yeah, it's more typically more secure for the employees. If they're civil servants, they usually just have more or less life tenure as long as they don't screw up in some particularly bad way. And the sort of security is, from what I understand, more attractive to women than to men, as men are more focused on how far they can advance and so on, which in the state system is not as easy as in the private system.
Not only you advance more slowly in a state system, but even when you advance, the satisfactions are minuscule, especially in this uh, in these kinds of bureaucratic industries, which would be almost all state industries. In the case of Norway, well, there is the oil industry, which is half state, half private, which is a lot more exciting. But other state industries, they're not particularly joyful. Yeah, I have been promoted as the general secretary of whatever, and I'm going to get 50 euros extra in the wages. Yay! I have advanced in the career. Yeah, it's that kind of joy. I mean, and I don't think that's attractive for a significant majority of men. I don't think it's attractive. And I don't think the industry itself needs to change because it's not attractive to men. I mean, it's not attractive, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason why we should expect or should want this kind of 50-50 balance in all
Mm-hmm.
jobs.
Mm-hmm. And if this chap, Christian Schellen, is so disturbed that there's not a more balanced thing, well, you can take the train, go to Sweden, hire in a private hospital in Sweden, and surprise, surprise, there will be a little bit more balance than in the state hospitals in either Sweden or Norway. So because he can't work in a private hospital in Norway because, well, thank to your state. Yeah, so there you go. There's a solution. I don't think, and I don't think it is even uh, ever likely to happen in the nursing profession. Strictly on this topic, on nursing profession, I don't think it will ever be the case that there will be 50% men in there, and I don't think it should.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when most nurses were men, but that's quite a long time ago, and
Yeah, but the industry as a whole was smaller, wasn't
yeah.
it? So there you go. I mean, yes, if there would be two hospitals in the entire country, then I can understand if most nurses are men. When there's 200, I don't think it will continue to be the case.
I'm not sure what that has to do with the number of hospitals or
Well, it
nurses.
has to do because if a profession is no longer elite, it's going to be less attractive. Because if there are two hospitals in the entire country, then it will be particularly hard to get in there, and it's going to be quite an elite profession to work in there.
Okay.
When it's a lot more pervasive, well, it's no longer an elite profession. So
Yeah, maybe.
pretty much the same with many are complaining that the prestige of the colleges has dropped. Well, yes, because there's colleges everywhere now, and everyone gets a trophy, and as such, it's no longer elite.
Yep.
So there's that. I mean, I don't know. What I do appreciate is that any governmental officials that were asked for this article, they didn't answer with the predictable, oh, we need to have a quota. Uh, that's to be appreciated, especially coming from Scandinavia. It is to be appreciated. There was not so long before, not so long ago, we were still doing this show 2 years ago. The usual response were, well, maybe we should have a quota. It was actually from Norway. I don't know if it was 2013 or 2014 when they were complaining that they don't have enough men in kindergartens, I think. And the previous, it was still the time of the socialists in Norway. That was right before the elections. They asked a governmental official, and the standard answer was, well, maybe we should have a quota, and everyone was like, facepalm, maybe not.
Yeah,
Not.
maybe we just have a system where you have a government office that's, as soon as you finish with school, you just apply to this government office and they just assign you a job and just do that.
Yeah,
Then
that sounds.
we can have perfect diversity and equality and so on. Wouldn't that be
Yeah,
wonderful?
Yeah, wouldn't that be wonderful? It sounds absolutely fabulous. Oh wait, uh, yeah, but it's funny when I've heard this argument being made, surprisingly enough, from a leftist who said, "Well, these kinds of quota-loving people are essentially advocating a planned economy, and and that's insane." And I mean, why? I don't know how to put it, because if you are to respect all the diversity quotas, not just by sex, but also in Britain or the US, there's also the popular quotas by race. If we are also to include, I don't know, quotas of left-handed people, I don't know,
Quotas by hair color,
by hair color, yeah, sure.
eye color, by um, by size. I mean, you don't want to have too many short people or too many tall people in a particular industry. That wouldn't be very diverse now, would it?
There you go. So, if we are to introduce enough quotas, you don't essentially abolish any sort of uh, market influences in the labor force. It becomes a centralized economy, a planned economy.
Yeah.
All
And I
right.
mean, they're of course not going to go that far. I mean, no one wants to have quotas for I don't know for red-headed people or something like that, but at least not so far. But it is definitely a step in that direction.
Yeah, but even if you maintain only quotas by race and sex, and it's already problematic.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next and last one. This is from the silly place, from the BBC. Police tweet about stealing a kiss sparks consent debate. Can you get more killjoy than that? If you steal a kiss, it's not a crime. This was an attempt by the Twitter account of the Spanish National Police Corps at Policia to sound romantic on Valentine's Day. It's an official account with a reputation for funny, light-hearted tweets and 2 million followers. But on this occasion, people online interpreted this tweet as implying that it's okay to kiss someone without their consent. The original message was posted on Sunday and translates in full as "If you steal a kiss, it's not a crime. Happy #Valentine's Day." It was followed by a kiss emoji. 15 hours later, this had attracted over 2,500 retweets, with some saying that it appeared to condone sexual harassment. One of the tweets that propelled the criticism came from left-wing, of course, left-wing Spanish political party, the United Left, which tweeted, "If someone steals a kiss from you, this is sexual harassment and you should act, not encourage it." The flood of tweets criticizing the original post led the Spanish police to post a second message clarifying the original, which read, "If your loved one steals a kiss from you by surprise, enjoy it. If someone steals a kiss from you without your consent, report it." This response seemed to satisfy some, but others kept the criticism going, saying that sexual advances without consent are a crime, regardless of who they are from. Domestic violence has historically been a sensitive issue in Spain. It was not considered a crime under the rule of Generalissimo Francisco Franco, the dictator who ran the country from the 30s to 1975. In 2004, the country passed new laws against gender violence, which made it easier for victims to seek legal redress. What the BBC doesn't say, that particular law triggered an era of gender Stalinism, which is the official term used now in the Spanish media, and was then abolished in 2014. That's the part that the BBC unsurprisingly left out from the news. Uh, really, the PC police makes even the police to apologize? I mean, really?
Yeah.
It's
Sexual
just
advances without consent are a crime, regardless of who they are from. So maybe before you kiss someone, you should have a signed consent form, um, probably notarized just to be sure.
just to be sure, yeah, just to be on the safe side of history. Um, Jesus Christ! I mean, this is the thing. We started with the PC police killjoys. We're ending with the PC police killjoys. No one can make any sort of joke and remark without uh, the pricks getting uptight. I mean, these kinds of idiots are essentially the new. Uh, I think I called them Puritans before. They are the new Puritans. There were cases at the late 19th century and whatnot where the uptight Puritans and Victorian-oriented individuals would scoff on every single. Oh my God! Can you imagine? They show a corner of a tit on the scene, and that's absolutely haram and absolutely uh, reprehensible. How could they do that? It's obscene. And now we laugh at that kind of mentality. Yet these kinds of uptight PC police pricks are essentially pretty much the same thing. Oh my God, can you imagine the account at Policia, which usually makes these kinds of light-hearted uh, messages and whatnot? They made a joke, a light-hearted joke about stealing a kiss on Valentine's Day. Can you imagine? Absolutely reprehensible. Pretty much the same kind of people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just this sort of terror that someone somewhere might be having fun.
Yeah, pretty much, pretty much. I mean, they do seem like acting. I'm convinced some of them do act in bad faith, but they do seem like, oh my God, someone is having fun. We gotta stop that. And the sad part is that whilst I'm convinced that a significant chunk of those who at least start these kinds of shitstorms, they do act in bad faith. But many people go along with this cohort because they think they're doing good, and that's the most dangerous type of totalitarian, the one who would torment you for your own good.
Yeah, I don't know if really the people organizing this are acting in bad faith. I think most of them really are true believers.
Well, I wouldn't call true believers, I know, let's say those who are sitting on the bench of Ofcom in Britain and fining people for causing gross offense. I don't think those are true believers. They're too old to be true believers. They grew up in a they know how things used to be, and I don't think I think a significant chunk of them, they're not true believers. Uh, or in the case of let's say individuals like, well, I can't find an example right now in Europe, but there are, the race baiters in the United States, people like Al Sharpton. I think those people don't act in. I don't think they are true believers. I think they act in bad faith because it's economically convenient, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a lot of those people. But I mean, I was talking more about these people on Twitter here who are calling out this tweets by the police. I don't think a lot of people there are acting in bad faith. I mean,
Absolutely, absolutely. Many of the followers are definitely not acting in bad faith. They are just true believers, or they just go along with the trend. But this particular politician, if someone steals a kiss from you, that's sexual harassment. You should act, not encourage it. I don't think that individual is necessarily a true believer. I think that individual who appears to have started a significant part of the shitstorm. I looked through the archives of the tweet in question, which to their credit they didn't delete it. That's what I liked, as opposed to similar scandals in the Anglosphere. The Spanish police were, yeah, well, we're gonna post this clarification and fuck you all. So that's progress. But I don't think this particular politician and political figure acted necessarily uh, in good faith as a true believer, but rather acted in bad faith, because if we're looking into the context, there is an upcoming general election in Spain, and everyone is trying to rally their base, and the base of the United Left. Well, what a surprise! It's usually the PC police.
yeah, it's certainly possible, but it also would fit with him just being a true believer. I don't know. It's I don't know this guy, so I can't really pass judgment there.
But yeah, I mean, and if there are a much smaller, because that's what I'm getting from you. Most of them are a significant chunk. Even those who start the shitstorms are just true believers. They don't act in bad faith. And if that is the case, then it's even worse. I mean, the PC mentality has won so much that you don't even have to have shit stirrers who act intentionally in bad faith. It's just what people believe.
Yeah, I mean, but that's still, it's still a minority opinion.
Absolutely, it is. But it's vocal and aggressive and appears to have some sway in some particular institutions.
Yeah, and the problem here is that there are not enough people um, who are challenging this on a sort of on an intellectual level, on making coherent arguments against this kind of mentality. I think the problem is a bit there's too many people who just say, oh, they've gone too far and so on, and oh, it's harmless, but um, the problem is that this sort of leaves the impression that there's these kinds of simple people who are just have these sort of ordinary traditional opinions, but then there's these sort of more advanced socially conscious people who are calling them out, um, and that impression is wrong because there are good arguments against this social justice thing. It's just that most people are not making them because they problem is that they share too many of the underlying assumptions of these social justice people. This sort of underlying egalitarianism of Western society in in the present. And the thing is that the social justice people are just um, taking some of these absurd assumptions that many people hold or profess to hold and just taking them to their logical conclusion.
Yep, 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 yep. So then again, it's that horrifying state. It's where a state where it's just what people believe. It's no longer just, or if it is an ideology, well, it is. It's an ideology that has won the cultural war so conclusively that nobody even thinks today that professing social justice warrior type of assumptions is essentially a political statement. It's rather considered, well, it's what normal civilized people think.
Yeah, if I could offer an analogy, it's sort of um, like what happened with Ricardo and Marx. So we have this classical British economics um, built up primarily by Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Um, you had this sort of quite powerful framework that could explain a lot of things about markets, about how they worked, but it had a couple of flaws. Um, for example, um, the theory of the value theory. You had the cost of production theory or the labor theory in classical economics, which are fatally flawed. And but the classical economists had enough sense um, to not follow these wrong assumptions to their logical and absurd conclusions, so that their system worked reasonably well, and they sort of applied some common sense to work around these deficiencies. But then along comes Marx, who has read all the classical economists, and sort of takes these wrong assumptions and just runs with them and builds up this whole system on it, and he does not apply these sort of common sense notions to apply to things like like this idea of the iron law of wages, that workers will always be paid just enough to sort of for them to survive and to produce some offspring to produce the next generation of workers. Even though by the time Marx wrote, the wages of workers had obviously risen by quite a lot. So Marx lacked the sort of common sense and took things to an extreme, which based on a sort of more or less reasonable foundation. And this sort of seems to me that this is the same thing that this sort of social justice movement has done. It's taken all these sort of latent ideas about egalitarianism and so on, about democracy and equal rights and treating people with dignity and so on. A lot of that is quite reasonable, but there's also some sort of faulty assumptions in there, and they're just taken all this and thrown common sense out the window and just pursuing this with completely a completely unhinged way and just taking it to the extreme without sort of doing this sort of sanity check and seeing that this leads to absurd conclusions.
That's a very good analogy. I never thought it that way. Yeah, yeah, that does it. Yeah, it doesn't stop somewhere along the way. Wait a minute, what the fuck is this? It never stops to analyze that. It just runs with it. Yeah, that's a very good analogy. Really, it's a fabulous analogy.
Thank you.
It does make sense. Yeah, never stop in question. Just like Marx never stopped in question. Wait a minute. When I started writing, things were this way. By the time I'm finishing Das Kapital, well, things have already changed quite a lot, and exactly in the opposite direction where I think they would. Never did that. Same with the social justice. Yeah, very good analogy. Yeah.
Of course, the problem is that during Marx's lifetime, you had what is called the marginal revolution, where in the 1870s, independently, three economists worked out the subjective theory of value, which on which modern economics is based, and thereby sort of implicitly refuted the underlying assumptions of the Marxist system. But most people didn't really pay attention to that, and then sort of shortly after Marx's death, you have the economist Eugen Böhm-Bawerk, who wrote this piece on the what is it called, the close of the Marxian system or something like that, which basically is a thorough debunking of Marxist economics, and basically ever since then, economists recognized that Marx's system is fatally flawed. The problem was just that these kind of arguments were a bit too technical for most people to understand, so that had very little impact on the wider culture. So I guess if we want to extend the analogy, we need to refute these kinds of social justice arguments on a sound theoretical basis, but also do so in a way that that the average person can understand, and putting in arguments in terms of that don't require a lot of in-depth study, but sort of have a kind of popular versions of these rigorous arguments refuting these basic principles that the average person can understand, and that is going to be one of the challenges going forward, I think.
Yeah, and it is quite a challenge. Although in some aspects, some practical aspects of the social justice ideology, it may be made simpler, the task of putting it to the wider culture without requiring 2 or 3 libraries to be read in advance in order to understand it. Whenever the social justice warriors go full Macintosh, essentially. I was reading recently about a case of a guy trolling this kind of social justice thing that because gender is a social construct, then Obviously, people are not just men and women because we say so. And then obviously things like women's showers are inherently discriminatory. So we're going to make them for everyone because gender is a social construct or something like that. It was very very circular type of argument. But the average people weren't part of that decision. They just most of them didn't know. And in order to make the point, the dude went into the women's showers and went in there naked and said, "Well, look, I am a woman because I say so." Obviously, this created a small stir in the area and said, "Look, the law says this, so I have a legal right to be here."
Hey, haven't you read yet Judith Butler? The idea that his penis is male genitalia, that's just a social construct.
Yeah, there we go.
It's
So
just
yeah.
it's just a piece of performance, and it's not this sort of absolute biological truth that a penis is male. No. It's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, so after he did that, whether they liked it or not, now the entire leadership of the area has to reconsider. Wait a minute, how the hell do we now make peace with the 99.9%, 99.5% of the population versus the social justice warrior lobby coming in from Washington with their egalitarian bullshit? So whether they like it or not, they're going to have to think it in terms of more rational without actually reading the mountains of academic gibberish written by various departments of gender and women's studies throughout the last 40 years. So, or the refutations of them, which are now increasingly um, being written as well. So, that's the kind of thing that I think makes the case to the culture without this guy actually didn't have to say anything. He just say with the law says that I have to be here, and that's it. Uh, otherwise he didn't say anything. He just went in there, and they called the police. And when the police came in and said, "Look, this is the law. I mean, what are you going to do? Arrest me for respecting the law?" And and then he left voluntarily. I mean, he didn't want to. He obviously he was there not to make a point, rather than genuinely harass or cause great concern among the community. It was just to make a point, and he did it without without actually saying too much.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and I was like, does this guy have a Patreon account or something? I would donate. So maybe he does it again in a different city or something. That's the kind of thing. Or for instance, there is that Canadian governmental agency that has a toll-free line for if you're triggered by their content. So and in addition to having trigger warning, they have a toll-free line to call if you're triggered by their website's content. And I was
Yeah,
like,
I'm,
well,
I'm triggered by trigger warnings and trigger hotlines. Sorry.
yeah, no, I was considering calling in and say that I'm triggered by the existence of taxes. Can they do something about that? I mean, whenever I hear the word taxes, I get triggered. So maybe there's something that can be done about that, such as I don't know, maybe abolishing the taxes altogether because they're triggering anyway. That's the kind of thing. I think humor, and probably that's why the PC police is so afraid of humor, because not no totalitarian hates something more than the sound of laughter. I mean, laughing at them and trolling their stupid laws is probably going to be one of the, not the only, and definitely not working in every aspect of life, but it's definitely going to be one of the arms to put arguments against social justice warrior assumptions to the culture without without requiring the culture to read uh, huge amounts of books and to get understanding of fine technical arguments.
Yeah. By the way, before I forget it, the book I was mentioning earlier, the exact title is Karl Marx and the Close of his System, or in German Zum Abschluss des Marxischen Systems by Eugen Böhm von Barwerk, just in case anyone wants to look that up.
Okay, fair point. Well, other than that, well, I think we pretty much covered everything, and we continue the tradition at the end of the show to make these kinds of practical advices of what to do. Maybe we should make it a tradition. Last show I explained how to infiltrate feminist groups and make them fight each other. Now we explain how to, mm, at least one way to put it to the culture, arguments against SJW assumptions uh, without asking the culture to understand, large swaths of academic gibberish, which is exactly how normal people watch these kinds of conversations. I mean, that's what I always do to the feminists. I mean, like, well, if you're so confident that you're correct, why don't you go on the streets of Krakow and take a random person on the street and explain to them how gender is a social construct and see how far that goes?
Yeah, that's sort of one of the advantages that a lot of this sort of feminist writing is more or less gobbledygook to the average person, and I suspect it's also just genuine gobbledygook. Just try reading something by Judith Butler, for example. She's just a terrible, terrible writer. She just can't write like a normal sentence that you can just like read it and just understand it. No, she has to. Everything has to be super, super complicated so that reading it takes like 10 times the amount of time reading a normal text would, and after that it's still mostly incoherent.
Oh, but I have read Judith Butler is the one who wrote Gender Trouble, Feminism, and the
Yes.
Version of Identity, right?
Yeah.
That's the work I have read from her. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very good example of academic gibberish.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty much. Yeah, I mean, if you try to translate that into normal English, it already sounds extremely absurd. And when you tell people, look, this is what these people believe, they were like, no, come on, you're making shit up. It can't be.
Yeah.
No, they can't be that stupid. And I'm like, well, prepare yourself. Here's the source. So yeah, yeah. I think we can use that to our advantage. I mean, in many cases, I've made arguments against feminism and generally SJW positions by using their own words, and I'm like, look, this is what these people believe. Are you sure you agree with them? And they were like, come on, they can't be that idiotic. And I'm like, well, there you go. This is the original book. Enjoy. And then several days later, I get contacted by the same people, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, they really are that idiotic. I mean, all this time I was thinking that everything you say and write on the internet, I was like, well, come on, maybe Lucian is a bit of an extremist, and then I read their own words, and I'm like, well, maybe Lucian is too kind. So we can use that into our advantage sometimes, maybe not always. I mean, the more academic, how should I put it, more academic friendly individuals are, the harder it is. But most people aren't really fond of this kind of social theory and academic gibberish and whatnot. And with those people, we should be having the most success once we introduce them to the original texts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I see that Judith Butler actually has more than one book. I thought that was her only book. Maybe I should read some more because maybe I can find some more stupid things. There you go. All right. Yeah, that's pretty much. I don't think I have anything further to say. But I presume you do.
Yeah, 80 minutes. We've gone through all this stuff. We've talked about 18th century revolutions and Marxism and all sorts of other tensions. That's actually quite impressive, despite how long our news section is, that we got through all of that. But we did, and the only thing left for me to say is to take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. Mr. Huff, take us out.